Zalin stood at the top of the balcony, looking out over the city of Alaris. The bright blue sky stretched endlessly above, dotted with flying ships that darted through the clouds like birds. The city, with its towering spires and sparkling domes, was a masterpiece of alien technology. It was a city built by the Ascendants, the most powerful species in the galaxy, and Zalin was proud to call it home. Her people were known for their advanced technology, superior intelligence, and strength. To Zalin, they were the pinnacle of evolution, far above any other race in the universe. But today, something was different. Today, she was waiting for the arrival of a human diplomat. The human race had never earned her respect. They were small, weak, and technologically backward in comparison to the Ascendants. It was hard for Zalin to understand why the Council of Nations had even decided to open diplomatic talks with them. To her, humans were nothing more than a curiosity, a species that had no place in the galaxy's power struggles. She had heard many of her people speak of humans with the same disinterest, even disdain. Why are we wasting time with these inferior creatures? She had heard one of her fellow warriors say not long ago. Humans are not even worth our attention. Zalin agreed. She had no interest in their primitive ways or their outdated technology. They were outclassed in every way, and she couldn't understand why they had made their way into the galactic spotlight. But duty called. As part of the Ascendant's Council, it was her responsibility to attend these meetings and ensure that her people's interests were protected. Soon, the shuttle carrying the human diplomat landed in the courtyard below. The hatch opened, and Zalin's eyes narrowed as she saw the human step out. Ethan Monroe. His name had been floating around the council for some time now, but this was the first time she would meet him in person. Zalin studied him as he descended from the ship. He wasn't tall like the Ascendants, but he held himself with a quiet confidence. His features were rough, his skin a pale color that made her feel slightly uncomfortable. His clothes, simple and practical, looked outdated compared to the luxurious attire of the Ascendants. Yet there was something about him that made her pause, just for a moment. As he approached, Zalin remained standing, her arms crossed in front of her. She would not bow to anyone, certainly not a human. "Ambassador Monroe," she said coldly, her voice sharp. Ethan stopped in front of her, his posture relaxed but alert. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ambassador Zalin," he said, his tone warm, but professional. Zalin barely nodded, her expression unchanged. "I trust you know why you're here." Ethan smiled slightly, but it wasn't a smile that showed weakness. "Yes, of course. The human race seeks to form a peaceful alliance with the Ascendants, if possible." Zalin raised an eyebrow. "Peace? With your kind?" She shook her head. "Why should we bother with such a fragile species?" Ethan's expression didn't change. "Because, Ambassador, even fragile species can offer value. Sometimes strength is not about size or technology. It's about adaptability, the ability to survive and grow under pressure." Zalin scoffed, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Survive? Humans barely survive in their own environment. How could you survive in a galaxy like this?" Ethan's eyes locked onto hers. There was something in his gaze that surprised her. It was steady, unwavering, and filled with something she couldn't quite place. Something that made her feel unsure. "I suppose you'll find out soon enough," he said, his tone almost like a challenge. Zalin felt a flicker of something stir inside her. Discomfort? No, that was impossible. She was the Ascendant, one of the greatest warriors to ever live. She was unshakable. "Let's get this over with," Zalin said, turning sharply and walking away, leading him toward the council chambers. She didn't want to spend any more time on this pointless conversation. Humans were beneath her, and nothing could change that. As they entered the grand hall, Zalin took her seat at the head of the table. The rest of the Ascendant leaders were already present, their faces calm and serious. Ethan took his place across from her, still maintaining his composed demeanor. Zalin couldn't help but notice how out of place he looked in the elegant surroundings, like a fish out of water. The meeting began, and as expected, the humans offered promises of peaceful cooperation. They spoke of trade, mutual respect, and an alliance that could benefit both sides. Zalin listened, her mind already made up. She was unimpressed. "Your words are nice," she said finally, cutting through the endless pleasantries. "But they are empty. Humans have nothing to offer us." Ethan's gaze didn't falter. "Perhaps," he said, "but sometimes it's not about what you have, but what you're willing to do. Humanity has a way of surprising others, of stepping up when the odds are against them." Zalin was about to respond when a sudden alert rang out through the chamber. It was an emergency broadcast, something about a breach in the security perimeter, surrounding the planet. Before Zalin could speak, the room fell into chaos. Alarms blared, and the holographic screens began flashing with reports of an impending attack. Her heart skipped a beat. It seemed that the galaxy wasn't going to let them have a peaceful moment. Zalin's mind immediately raced, preparing for the worst. But then she saw something unexpected. Ethan was already standing, pulling out a small communication device from his pocket. "We need to move quickly," he said, his tone shifting from diplomatic to commanding. "I'll lead you to safety." For a moment, Zalin simply stared at him. He wasn't scared. In fact, he seemed prepared. Perhaps she had underestimated him after all. With a small sigh, Zalin rose from her chair. "Lead the way, Ambassador." "Monroe," she said, her voice colder than she intended. But beneath the coldness, there was a hint of something new, a curiosity that she couldn't quite explain. And so, the unexpected journey began. The sounds of alarms filled the air as Zalin and Ethan hurried through the hallways of the council building. The once elegant and peaceful atmosphere had quickly turned chaotic. People scrambled to their stations, preparing for whatever threat was approaching. Zalin's mind raced, calculating the possible outcomes, trying to make sense of the situation. She had fought in many battles, but this was different. She had never expected her first encounter with a human to be in the middle of an emergency. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed calm and in control. His face showed no sign of panic, only quiet, focus. As they moved swiftly toward a nearby exit, he spoke to the security officers, giving orders that only seemed to enhance the chaos around them. "We need to evacuate now," Ethan said, his voice firm. He turned to Zalin, who was still processing what was happening. "Do you have a safe zone or bunker nearby?" Zalin nodded, her training taking over. "Follow me." They moved quickly, weaving through corridors and passing armored guards who were gearing up for whatever attack was incoming. Zalin's mind was sharp, but a nagging feeling had started to creep in. She had never seen an emergency like this, and it felt different from the usual galactic skirmishes she was used to. As they reached a secure area in the lower levels of the building, Zalin looked over at Ethan. Despite the sudden danger, he seemed unfazed. She couldn't help but wonder, how was he able to maintain such composure? "You're not like other humans," Zalin remarked as they entered a large underground shelter. The walls were thick, lined with reinforced steel, and there were rows of medical stations and emergency supplies. It was designed to withstand just about any assault. Ethan glanced at her, a faint smile on his lips. "I've had my share of crises. The key is not to panic." Zalin couldn't help but scoff, but she was also impressed. Humans were often seen as reactive and quick to fall apart in moments of danger, but this one was different. He didn't seem afraid or overwhelmed. He was steady, focused. The blast doors of the shelter closed with a heavy thud, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the hallways. Zalin stepped away from the door, walking to a wall-mounted terminal that displayed a live feed of the situation. The images on the screen showed multiple ships breaking through the planet's defense grid, their designs sleek and unfamiliar. They weren't Ascendant ships. They were from a hostile faction known as the Zethar, a ruthless group that had recently begun to cause trouble in the galaxy. Zethar, Zalin muttered under her breath, her mind already calculating the best strategies for defending the planet. The Zethar were known for their brutal tactics, and they were no strangers to the Ascendants. But Zalin had never expected an attack to come so suddenly, so quickly. Ethan stepped closer, observing the feed. They've already breached the perimeter. We're not going to be able to stop them from landing. Zalin narrowed her eyes. We may not be able to stop them completely, but we can still slow them down. She turned to the emergency communication system and activated it. The building's lights flickered, and the hum of machinery filled the room as Zalin sent out orders to her people, directing them to the defense systems. She moved quickly, her thoughts sharp and precise. Ethan watched her in silence, then spoke, up. "You're thinking of fighting back, aren't you?" Zalin didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice. We can't just let them invade and take control." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You do realize that the humans are not as well equipped as your people, right? We don't have the technology or firepower to match the Zethar." Zalin turned to him, her face set in a determined expression. "Then we'll do what humans do best. We'll adapt. We'll use whatever we can. We can't let them take this world." Ethan studied her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "You have guts. I'll give you that." "You're not afraid to fight, are you?" Zalin asked, her voice sharp. It wasn't a challenge, it was a statement. Ethan's expression remained calm. "I've been in my fair share of battles. I'm key." "Not worried about that." He turned to the terminal and began typing quickly, his fingers moving with purpose. "I might not have your fancy weapons or tech, but I can make sure your defenses are ready to go. Give me a minute." Zalin watched him, her mind buzzing with calculations. She couldn't believe it. Here was a human standing next to her suggesting that he could help in a situation like this. In her world, humans were the weak link. But now, she was beginning to see something different. Ethan was resourceful, focused, and determined. Within minutes, Ethan had overridden the control systems and rerouted additional power to the defense grid. The systems hummed to life, and a new wave of energy surged through the planet's shield. Zalin's eyes widened as she saw the immediate effect. The incoming Zethar ships began to falter as their weapons were blocked by the reinforced shield. "You did it," Zalin said, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and admiration. Ethan gave her a small nod. "It's not much, but it'll buy us some time." Zalin's mind raced. She had always been taught that strength came from technology, from weapons, from the superiority of her people. But here, in this moment, Ethan had shown her something new. He didn't rely on superior technology. Instead, he relied on his mind, on his ability to think quickly, to adapt. As the Zethar ships tried to regroup, Zalin turned back to the terminal, a new respect for Ethan in her heart. "This battle isn't over, but we'll make sure they don't win." For the first time, Zalin felt a sense of uncertainty. Could it be that humans had more to offer than she had ever given them credit for? Could they be the key to winning this fight? She had always thought of humanity as inferior. But now, she wasn't so sure. The distant roar of explosions shook the underground shelter. Zalin's sharp eyes scanned the feed from the planet's surface, watching as the Zethar forces pushed forward, their ships now trying to break through the reinforced shields. The battle wasn't over yet, but they were, holding their ground for now. She turned to Ethan, who was still standing at the terminal, working quickly to optimize the defense systems. "You're doing well," Zalin said, her voice more than a little surprised. The words felt strange to her. She had never been one to offer compliments easily, especially not to humans. Ethan glanced up at her, his face serious but calm. "We're not out of the woods yet, but this is helping." Zalin nodded. She knew that the moment the Zethar figured out a way to counter the shields, the real battle would begin. As a warrior of the Ascendants, she knew the importance of staying ahead of the enemy. She wasn't one to be caught off guard, but there was something she had learned in the last few hours that shook her belief in what she had always known. Humans weren't as helpless as she had once thought. She looked at Ethan again. He wasn't just the diplomat she had first met. He was something more, a human, leading, adapting, and doing what needed to be done, without hesitation. She couldn't deny it any longer. He was impressive. "Zalin, there's something else," Ethan said, his voice serious now. He turned to face her fully, a look of urgency in his eyes. "I've been monitoring the surface. The Zethar are targeting specific locations, and one of them is a research facility near the northern mountains. It's a critical site, and if they take it, they'll have access to some of our most advanced technologies. We can't let that happen." Zalin felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen the destructive power of the Zethar before, and if they got their hands on that kind of technology, they could wipe out whole colonies without a second thought. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Not much," Ethan said, his eyes scanning the data on the terminal. "The Zethar are closing in fast. We need to move now if we're going to save it." Zalin didn't hesitate. She had been trained for situations like this, swift, decisive action. Without saying another word, she turned and started for the exit, her armor clicking with every step. Ethan was quick to follow, moving with the same purpose. As they exited the shelter, they were met by a small team of Ascendant soldiers, armed and ready for action. Zalin quickly took charge, issuing orders. "We move out in 5 minutes. Ethan, stay close. I'll be leading the way." Ethan nodded. There was no argument in his eyes, just determination. Zalin couldn't help but feel a strange respect for him. Despite everything that had happened, he had never once backed down or shown fear. It was unexpected. Humans, in her experience, were often quick to panic when faced with danger. But not this one. Not Ethan. As they made their way to the surface, the sounds of the battle grew louder. Ships zoomed overhead, and the skies were filled with smoke and flashes of light. It wasn't the first time Zalin had seen war, but there was something different about this battle. It felt personal. She had once thought that the Ascendants were the only ones truly capable of standing against threats like the Zethar. But now, she wasn't so sure. The group reached the northern mountain range where the research facility was located. The building stood at the edge of a cliff, surrounded by dense forest. It was a perfect location for a facility designed to hide important technologies. But now it was in danger of being destroyed. Zalin could see the distant glow of Zethar ships hovering over the facility, preparing to strike. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice low. "Ethan, I need you to stay close to me. These will be close quarters." Ethan, who had been silent until now, met her eyes. "I'm ready." Zalin turned and led the way, her soldiers following closely behind. As they approached the facility, she could feel the tension rising. The Zethar were not just looking to capture the technology, they were looking to kill anyone who stood in their way, and if they succeeded, it would be a victory that could change the course of the entire war. They made their way through the forest, their movements swift and calculated. Zalin's mind was clear, focused entirely on the mission. She knew that this would be dangerous, no, deadly, but she wasn't afraid. She had been in far worse situations, and she had survived. She always survived. When they reached the facility, they were met by a hail of gunfire from Zethar soldiers stationed around the building. Zalin's team quickly returned fire, using the cover of the forest to their advantage. The battle was fierce, but Zalin didn't flinch. Her training kicked in, and she moved with the precision of a seasoned warrior, her blade cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. Ethan was beside her, using the weapons that the Ascendants had provided to him. Despite being out of his element, he moved with surprising skill, his aim steady as he took down enemies with practiced ease. Zalin couldn't help but glance at him occasionally, watching as he worked. There was something almost natural about the way he fought. He wasn't just following orders, he was thinking on his feet, adjusting and making decisions in the heat of the moment. For a brief moment, Zalin felt a sense of admiration for the human by her side. He wasn't as strong or fast as the Ascendants, but there was something he had that she couldn't deny, a determination to protect, to fight for something greater than himself. "Move up," Zalin shouted, signaling her team to advance. With Ethan by her side, they pushed forward, making their way into the heart of the facility. The Zithar forces were retreating now, their morale shaken by the unexpected resistance. The building was secure, but the damage was done. The Zithar had left their mark. As the last of the enemy soldiers were cleared out, Zalin stood, catching her breath. Her soldiers began securing the facility, making sure that the technology was safe. Ethan approached her, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We did it," he said, offering a rare smile. Zalin nodded, her mind already calculating the next steps. "For now," she said, "but we can't let our guard down." Ethan's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. "Agreed." As they stood there, surveying the aftermath of the battle, Zalin couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. Not just for herself, but for the humans who had helped them. For Ethan. Maybe humans were more capable than she had ever imagined. And in that moment, Zalin began to understand that the true strength of a species wasn't just in its technology, its size, or its power. It was in the will to fight, to survive, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in that, humanity was stronger than she had ever given them credit for. The battle at the research facility was over, but the war was far from finished. Zalin stood at the edge of the facility's rooftop, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the Zithar. The explosions had stopped, but the echoes still rang in her ears. Her soldiers were securing the area, checking for any hidden threats. Despite their victory, the weight of the war pressed heavily on her shoulders. The Zithar were relentless, and they would strike again. This she knew for certain. Ethan was beside her, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. He had proven himself in the heat of battle, and now he stood quietly next to her, his eyes trained on the same horizon. Zalin couldn't help but notice how at ease he seemed in this chaotic world. He wasn't a soldier, yet he moved with the calm determination of one. "We've bought some time," Zalin said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but the exhaustion was evident in her tone. "But the Zithar will come for us again. We can't afford to be complacent." Ethan nodded. "I know, but right now, we've got a chance to regroup. We can't keep running forever. We need to take the fight to them." Zalin turned to face him, surprised by the strength in his words. He wasn't wrong. The more they waited, the more the Zithar would gain. If they kept reacting to the enemy instead of taking the initiative, they would always be on the defensive. "That's what we need to do, isn't it?" she said, her tone thoughtful. "We've been on the defensive long enough." Ethan met her eyes, his gaze steady. "Yes, the longer we wait, the stronger they'll become. We need to strike before they can plan their next move." For a moment, Zalin said nothing. She had always been taught to strike when the time was right, to plan every move meticulously. But something about Ethan's words stirred something in her, a sense of urgency she hadn't fully felt before. It was the same feeling she had seen in humans who were backed into a corner. They didn't hesitate. They fought back. "Then we need to gather more forces," Zalin said finally, her voice firm. "We can't do this alone." Ethan nodded. "Agreed, but we'll also need more than just firepower. We'll need a plan, something the Zithar don't expect." Zalin's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. The Zithar were known for their strength, their ability to overwhelm their enemies with sheer numbers. But they weren't invincible. There had to be a way to outsmart them. "I know the terrain," Zalin said slowly, her thoughts forming into a plan. "If we can lure them into the mountains, we can use the terrain to our advantage. We can set traps, create confusion, and use our smaller numbers to hit them where it hurts." Ethan listened closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Sounds like a good idea. But how do we make sure they follow us into the mountains?" Zalin smiled, the plan taking shape in her mind. "We make them think we're retreating. The Zithar always assume that their enemies will run when the pressure's on. We'll make them believe that we're weak, that we're falling back. Then we turn the tables on them when they least expect it." Ethan's eyes gleamed with understanding. "We give them a false sense of security. When they think they've won, we hit them hard." Zalin's smile grew. Exactly. As they finalized their plan, Zalin felt a surge of something she hadn't expected. Hope. It had been a long time since she'd felt hopeful about anything. But in this human, she saw something different. Ethan wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for a future, for something more than just the next battle. It was that spirit that made him unique, and that spirit was contagious. "We'll need to move fast," Zalin said, snapping back into focus. "Gather what forces we can. We don't have much time before the Zithar regroup." Ethan was already on it, his hands moving quickly to communicate with his team. Zalin could see the same determination in his eyes that she had seen in the fiercest warriors of her own kind. He wasn't just following orders, he was a leader, and his people were starting to follow him. As they prepared for the next phase of their plan, Zalin found herself reflecting on everything that had happened since she first met Ethan. She had called humans inferior without a second thought, believing that their weakness was something that could be easily overlooked. But now she saw that they had something her people didn't. The Ascendants were powerful, yes, but they had grown complacent, too confident in their own strength. Humans, on the other hand, had learned to adapt, to fight against overwhelming odds, and to survive. Maybe, just maybe, that was what the galaxy needed. The hours passed quickly as they gathered their forces. Zalin coordinated with her soldiers, preparing them for the traps they would set. Ethan worked tirelessly alongside them, using his knowledge of human tactics and strategy to help. It was strange to think of him as an ally, someone she could rely on in battle, but in this moment, she knew she could trust him. As the sun began to set, the final preparations were complete. Zalin stood at the front of their small army, looking out at the mountains. The air was thick with the tension of what was about to come. She could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been before. Now, she had more than just her people to fight for. She had the humans, too. "Are you ready?" she asked, turning to Ethan. He gave her a confident smile. "Always." With that, they moved out. The night was their cover, and the mountains. Ahead would be their battleground. As they trekked through the forest, Zalin's thoughts were clear. They had one chance, one opportunity to turn the tide. If they failed, the Zithar would overrun them, but if they succeeded, they would deal a blow to the enemy that they would never forget. The plan was set in motion, and there was no turning back now. As they made their way toward the mountains, Zalin could feel the weight of the coming battle, but this time, she wasn't alone. She had the humans beside her, and that made all the difference. The night was cold as Zalin and Ethan led their forces up the rocky path into the mountains. The trees around them whispered with the wind, and the dark sky above seemed to press down on them, heavy with anticipation. The plan was in motion, and the Zithar would soon be close enough for them to spring their trap. Zalin's mind was sharp, every step calculated. Her soldiers moved silently behind her, their steps light on the uneven ground. Ethan, too, moved with precision, his team close behind. He had proven himself many times now, and Zalin couldn't deny that his calm demeanor and quick thinking had saved them more than once. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He was a warrior in his own right. As they reached a narrow pass between two cliffs, Zalin turned to Ethan. "This is where we make our stand," she said, her voice low and steady. "We set the traps here, where they'll be forced to funnel through. It will give us the advantage." Ethan nodded, his expression focused. "I trust you. Let's do this." The plan was simple. Lure the Zithar into the narrow mountain pass, where their numbers would count for little. The small, agile team of ascendants and humans would use the rocks and trees for cover, striking quickly and decisively. The traps would slow the Zithar down, giving them just enough time to pick off the enemy one by one. Zalin had to admit, the thought of taking the fight to the Zithar was both thrilling and terrifying. The enemy was brutal, and the danger was very real, but she had never felt more alive. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, she was fighting for something greater than herself. Not just her people, but all the lives that could be, saved if they succeeded. Ethan moved to check the traps with his team, his hands steady as he worked. Zalin watched him for a moment, feeling a strange pull in her chest. She had always prided herself on her ability to fight alone, to carry the weight of her people's hopes and dreams. But now, with Ethan beside her, she felt like she was part of something bigger, something stronger. Humans, despite their perceived weaknesses, had proven time and again that they could adapt, survive, and fight for what mattered. As Ethan finished setting the final trap, he turned to her. "We're ready," he said, his voice firm but calm. Gullin gave him a nod, the slightest smile pulling at the corners of her mouth. Then we wait. The hours seemed to stretch on as they waited in silence. The air grew colder. The only sounds, the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional movement from their soldiers. Zalin kept her eyes on the path ahead, her mind racing through every possible outcome. She knew the Zithar would be ruthless, but she also knew they had a chance. If they could just get through this, they could deal a significant blow to the enemy. Suddenly, a crackling sound came over the communication system, breaking the silence. "Incoming," a voice said. Zalin's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the voice of one of her soldiers. She turned to Ethan. "It's time." The first Zithar soldiers appeared at the edge of the pass, their forms dark against the fading light. The sight of them sent a shiver down Zalin's spine. They were tall and fearsome, their black armor reflecting the dim light as they moved with military precision. Zalin's breath caught in her throat as she saw their numbers. It was more than they had expected. "We'll have to act fast," Ethan said, his voice low. Zalin didn't need to be told twice. She signaled to her team, and they began to move into position. As the Zithar advanced, the first trap was triggered. The ground beneath their feet gave way, sending a few soldiers tumbling into a pit filled with sharp, pointed stakes. There, screams echoed in the pass, and the rest of the Zithar hesitated for only a moment before continuing forward. Zalin's team moved swiftly, taking advantage of the confusion. They struck with precision, picking off soldiers with well-placed shots and swift attacks. But the Zithar were not easily defeated. They fought back with brutal force, their weapons cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. Ethan, to Zalin's surprise, fought with a strength she hadn't expected. He was calm, moving with purpose as he directed his team. He wasn't just following orders, he was leading. Every time one of their soldiers fell, Ethan was there to take charge, rallying the others to push forward. His presence gave them hope, gave them strength. Zalin had seen many battles in her time, but she had never seen anyone fight with such raw determination. As the battle raged on, Zalin found herself drawn to Ethan's side. She fought alongside him, her blade flashing, in the dim light as she cut through the enemy. There was something different about this fight, something more personal. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about protecting something worth fighting for. "Watch out!" Ethan's voice broke through the chaos as a group of Zithar soldiers flanked them. as Ilin turned just in time to see one of the enemy, soldiers charging at her. Without thinking, she ducked and rolled, avoiding the blow. She rose to her feet, meeting the soldier head-on, her blade striking with deadly accuracy. In the distance, she saw Ethan taking down another group of Zithar, his movements swift and decisive. As the last of the Zithar forces began to retreat, Zalin took a moment to catch her breath. The battle had been brutal, but they had won. The enemy was in disarray, and they had dealt a significant blow. Ethan stood beside her, wiping the sweat from his brow. His face was smudged with dirt, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Zalin nodded, her chest rising and falling with each breath. "Yes, we did." As they surveyed the battlefield, Zalin couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for her own people, but for the humans who had stood beside them. Ethan had led with the same courage as any ascendant warrior. In that moment, Zalin realized something that she had never truly understood before. Humans were not inferior. They were strong, resilient, and capable of greatness in ways she had never imagined. "Ethan," Zalin said, her voice steady, "I was wrong about humans." He turned to her, his expression softening. "What do you mean?" Zalin met his gaze, her eyes filled with respect. "You're not weak. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. Humanity has a fire that we, my people, have lost." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. "We're all stronger than we think." Zalin nodded, a sense of gratitude filling her heart. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just fighting for her own people. She was fighting for something greater. Something that included humanity. And as the smoke cleared and the battle came to an end, Zalin knew one thing for certain. This war wasn't just about defeating the Zithar. It was about understanding each other, about realizing that strength could come from the most unexpected places. And for the first time in a long while, Zalin was filled with hope for the future. The battle in the mountains had been a turning point. Zalin and Ethan stood side by side on the mountain's edge, looking down at the scattered remains of the Zithar forces. The smoke of the battlefield still lingered in the air, a reminder of the fierce fight they had just endured. But despite the victory, both of them knew the war was far from over. The Zithar had been dealt a blow, yes, but they were still a formidable enemy, and their forces were vast. Zalin had been a warrior her entire life, and she knew the price of underestimating an opponent. The Zithar would regroup. They would come back with even greater force, and this time, they would not be as easy to outsmart. Ethan nodded. "We can't stop now. We've made allies, and we've gained respect. It's time to use that to end this war for good." Zalin turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. There was no longer any trace of the superiority complex she once held. The humans had proven themselves to be just as capable, just as strong as anyone else in the galaxy. It was a realization that had taken time, but now it was clear. Humans were not inferior. They were essential. "We need to form alliances," Zalin continued, her voice more serious now. "Not just with each other, but with other species as well. We cannot win this war alone." Ethan's face softened as he considered her words. "I agree. The more support we can get, the better. It's not just about defeating the Zithar. It's about building a future where we can all work together." Zalin looked out across the battlefield where the last of the Zithar soldiers had been removed. The Zithar had underestimated them, but they were smart. The Ascendants had their advanced technology, and the humans had their adaptability. But together, they were unstoppable. Humans and Ascendants working together. "It's a powerful idea," Zalin said thoughtfully. "It's a partnership that could change the galaxy." Ethan smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "It's not going to be easy. There are still people who don't trust each other, who think we're too different. But maybe, if we show them what we've accomplished, we can change that." Zalin turned to him, her face serious. "We will change it, one battle at a time." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. The wind blew through the trees around them, carrying with it the sounds of victory, but also the weight of what was still to come. The Zithar were not done yet, but now they had a real chance to fight back. They had a chance to create something new. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Zalin felt a stirring inside her, a sense of hope. It was a strange feeling for her, one she had never experienced before. But standing beside Ethan, knowing what they had just accomplished, she couldn't help but feel like they were on the verge of something bigger. In the days that followed, Zalin and Ethan worked tirelessly to rally more allies to their cause. The Ascendants, once the rulers of the galaxy, now had to work together with humanity. It was a shift that would take time, but it was one that they both believed in. The humans had shown their strength, their resilience, and their ability to adapt to any situation. The Ascendants had the power, the technology, and the knowledge of the galaxy's complexities. Together, they were a force no one could ignore. Galen met with representatives from different species, discussing plans to unite their forces against the Zithar. She had seen firsthand what the Zithar were capable of, and she knew that defeating them would take more than just brute force. It would take strategy, unity, and trust. She had learned that from Ethan and the humans. Trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned, and over time, humanity had earned it. Ethan worked alongside her, negotiating with other species, building bridges where there had once been walls. It wasn't always easy. There were still those who doubted the humans, who believed they were too weak to stand alongside the more powerful species. But each victory, each battle, brought more respect, and with every battle, Ethan's influence grew. One afternoon, after a long day of negotiations, Zalin and Ethan found themselves sitting together on the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast, untouched valley. The stars were just beginning to appear in the sky, and the air was cool and crisp. "We're really doing it, aren't we?" Ethan said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. Kalin looked at him, her expression softening. "Yes, we are. It's not easy, but we're building something that has never existed before, a future where we can all stand together." Ethan smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I never thought it would be possible. But here we are." Zalin's eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw him not just as a human diplomat, but as a partner, someone who had fought alongside her, who had risked everything to protect the future of their people. "We've both come a long way," she said, her voice quiet. "And we've both changed. Maybe we were never so different after all." Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Maybe we weren't." As they sat together, the silence between them was no longer awkward or strained. It was comfortable, filled with understanding. They had been through so much, and yet here they were, standing side by side as equals. And for the first time in a long while, Zalin felt a sense of peace. The war wasn't over, but the future was no longer uncertain. They had a chance, a real chance, to build something new. And for the first time, she knew she wasn't alone in that fight.